Good morning, everyone, and welcome on behalf of the France Ireland Chamber of Commerce. We've organised this webinar under our working group Climate Response La Vie en Vert to mark Earth Day, which is tomorrow. I am Mary Honohan. I'm a partner in PwC and I'm a member of the Council of the Chamber and the Executive, and I chair the working group Climate Response La Vie en Vert. In my view, climate change is one of the most pressing problems facing our world today. It affects everyone from families worrying about their children's futures to pension funds deciding where to invest. It was a big part of last year's programme for government, resulting in the recent publication of the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Bill. At PwC, we made a net zero commitment. Across our network, we have committed to reducing our total greenhouse gas emissions by 50% in absolute terms by 2030. This includes, for example, a switch to 100% renewable electricity in all territories. In the recent PwC CEO survey, 78% of Irish CEOs said climate change is a threat to their organisation's growth prospects, but just 32% of Irish CEOs said they have factored climate change into their strategic risk management activities. ESG is very topical. I've seen lots of commentary in the media and I'm seeing clients reach out to us looking for support with realigning corporate strategy, governance and accountability. And we're also being asked what we, PwC, are doing to make our own contribution from our business. Against this backdrop, I'm pleased you have been able to join us for our seminar this morning. What future for our climate? Is COP26 our last chance? I believe the answer is no, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion this morning. Our moderator is Mark Foley, and Mark is Group Chief Executive at EirGrid, which operates and develops the electricity system on this island. EirGrid is the Irish partner in the Celtic Interconnector. And Mark is also a member of the Council of the French Chamber. Turning to our speakers, Stéphane Crouzat, French climate ambassador, is well known to most of us. He was French ambassador to Ireland from 2017 to 2020. And His Excellency Vincent Guérend, ambassador of France to Ireland, was appointed in September 2020. His previous postings focused on European affairs and Asia. Ambassador Guérend was previously Chief of Staff of the Secretary of State for European Affairs, EU Ambassador to Indonesia and Brunei Darussalam, the first Director for Finance and Corporate Support in the European Commission and European External Action Service, and Deputy Chief of Mission at the French Embassy in Ankara. During the course of the webinar, feel free to type your questions in the chat function and we'll try to deal with them later on. I'll now hand you over to Mark and I hope that you enjoy the discussion.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you all, Your Excellency. It's a great pleasure to be here in what may be a defining year in human history from two perspectives. Firstly, the vaccine offers us the hope of finally defeating COVID-19 and returning to some degree of normality in our lives. Secondly, and thankfully, climate action is finally getting close to the top of the agenda where it rightfully belongs post-COVID, because the clock's against us. In Ireland, our minister just announced the most ambitious piece of legislation in our country's history in the form of the Climate Action and Low Carbon Development Bill. We in EirGrid recently launched Shaping Our Electricity Future, the most ambitious consultation programme by any state company in decades, designed to find the best pathway to 2030. And over the next 2 days, US President Joe Biden, at his invitation, is engaging with 40 of the world leaders to discuss the climate crisis. And finally, it's becoming increasingly clear that UN COP26 later this year may be our last chance at really halting the pace of climate change. And this matter is the subject of this webinar. I'm going to start with Stéphane, my old friend Stéphane. Firstly, congratulations on your appointment as Climate Ambassador for France. What a fantastic honour and what a wonderful role. And I know you'll do a fantastic job. And I'm going to give you the big question first and the tough question. Is UN COP26 our last chance to save our environment or even mankind itself?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm really delighted to see some very familiar faces, Mary, Mark, Vincent, and Cleona, and so many friends also who have joined today. So it's really a great pleasure to be back in Ireland, even though it's virtually. Well, to answer your very simple question, Mark, first of all, let me say why COP26 is important. You remember we signed the Paris Agreement in 2015, and in the Paris Agreement, it is written that every 5 years, countries, parties should increase ambition. And it's something that's very important in the Paris Agreement. It's a universal agreement, and every party should do their part. There's no obligation as to what they should do, but there's an obligation that they should commit to doing something. And there's an obligation that they should commit to enhance ambition every 5 years. And here we are, 5 COPs later. It's actually 6 years now, but COVID stopped us from holding the COP26 in 2020. So here we are, 5 years on, when all parties must deliver a renewed NDC, nationally determined contribution, to make sure that we're on a path to respecting the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Unfortunately, we're not there at all. You all know that 2020 was the highest year on record. The last 5 years were the highest years on record. And there was this very gloomy assessment by the Secretariat of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, that looked at all the NDCs that had been submitted so far. Only a handful, in fact, one third of emissions are covered by the current NDCs that have been submitted. And they crunched the numbers and they saw that we are heading to a 0.5% reduction in emissions by 2030 from a 2010 baseline. The IPCC has said that in order to reach the 1.5 degree target, we should be on the path of doing minus 45% reduction between 2010 and 2030. So we're completely not on track. And that's why we absolutely must deliver something in Glasgow. And that something is several-fold. First of all, increasing ambition on the mitigation side. That means that every party should give in their nationally determined contributions. Also, they should set a long-term goal. And here, in that respect, things have changed in the last months. We saw that China has now set a goal for 2060, a long-term goal for 2060 of carbon neutrality, followed by Japan, followed by Korea for 2050. The European Union had made that commitment back in 2019. So there is increasingly a drive towards long-term neutrality in the middle of the century. However, it's all very well and good to do that, to set that target for 2050. Well, we have to deliver now, and that's why the NDCs are so important. And the context is also very much more favorable because we have the US back on track. President Biden rejoined the Paris Agreement in the first hours of his office, and they're organizing this very, very important summit on the 22nd of April. That's tomorrow, Earth Day, the 5th anniversary of the signing of the Paris Agreement. We adopted it in December 2015, but we signed it on the 22nd of April 2016. So it's a very symbolically important date, and we're expecting something big from the US. Hopefully a doubling of their original commitment back in the Obama administration. So that's the first thing, extremely important to be on track and to keep the trajectory, a realistic, credible trajectory with enhanced NDCs. The second point that's very, very important to stress for the Paris Agreement is finance. We collectively, developed countries, committed to giving $100 billion in climate finance back in 2019 for developed countries every single year from 2020 onwards. So stepping up our commitments to reach 2020, $100 billion. We're not there yet. We haven't got the latest figures, but in all probability, we'll be below that mark. And that's not good news. That's not good news because we have made that promise, we have made that pledge, and we bear a responsibility, we collectively, developed countries, for what is happening today, and the developing countries keep reminding us of that. So it will be very important at Glasgow to be able to have extra commitments from developed countries to reach that target. And then the final point that I'd like to stress for Glasgow, it's something that's a little less visible for the general public, but it's exceedingly important, is to finalize what we call the rule book of the Paris Agreement. The Paris Agreement was a framework agreement which left a lot of details open for future decisions to be taken on how to implement the Paris Agreement. We did a lot of the work back in COP24 at Katowice, which in that respect was a great success. But there are a few things that are still on hold with which we have not may come up with an agreement. And the most important one is what we refer to as Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, and that's how we organize the exchange of emissions, of emission quota in the world. It seems it's an extremely complicated topic, very technical, but it has incredibly important implications, because if it's not done right, it's the whole integrity of the Paris Agreement that might be at stake, the environmental integrity. So it's so we're looking at that very, very carefully, and hopefully we'll be able to come up with a decision. And just a final word before I hand over back to you, Mark. We have some very important deadlines coming up before COP. First of all, is tomorrow. We'll see what the US are going to say, and how important that new commitment of the US is going to be. But we're also expecting some important new pledges by other countries. Canada had said it would come up with new proposals. We're going to have China at the level of Xi Jinping, who has confirmed last night that he would participate. So it's going to be a very, very high profile event. And then two other events that I'd like to flag. That's the G7. The G7, the summit leaders, the Leaders Summit is in June, and that's going to be extremely important as well, because climate is going to be at the top of that agenda, and we're hopefully going to have an extremely ambitious collective declaration from the G7, which will lead us into the G20. The G20 members represent about 80% of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's going to be the day before the opening of COP26, which will open on the 1st of November. And if we can manage something important at the G20 level, it will be very good for the development of the discussions at COP26 itself. Thanks, Mark. You're on mute, Mark.
Thank you very much, Stéphane. We're going to come back to COP26 because I have questions around much of what you've said. But let me go to Vincent. Vincent, the EU has proven to be a world leader in protecting the environment and for setting ambitious targets for decarbonisation in times past. But I have to ask you, is the EU doing enough? Is it pulling its weight? Is it providing real leadership on a world stage?
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you also and to the Chamber of Commerce for inviting me today. And I'm very glad to indeed share this panel with my dear predecessor, Stéphane. When it comes to the EU, let me give you just two perspectives. One is very much from the inside, and maybe one from the outside, when it was indeed posted in Indonesia, as was mentioned before. Seen from the inside, I had the chance to be in the European Commission itself, seconded from the French Foreign Service in the year 2005, 2009, and then again. And I can tell you, as most of you will have remembered, that the initial drive on climate action was very much also inspired by the EU already 15, 20 years ago in several member states, but also then at the EU level. And as we speak now, I think it's fair to say that the EU is the only and first major actor in the world to have had a strong, clear and continuous leadership on climate action in the world. Of course, now it's very good to see the US back on track, as mentioned by Stéphane. It's very, let's say, promising to see that the Chinese are also now taking new steps and hopefully strong commitments towards 2050. Well, if I may say, in the privacy of this room, we had Canada back and forth, Australia still a question mark, but the EU has been steadfast and has been always really pushing this direction with very clear commitment already. Remember, I think it was almost 10 years ago with the so-called 320, 20% cut in the greenhouse gases compared by 1990 levels, 20% renewable, 20% improvements through energy efficiency. So this was already set almost 10 years ago. And as indicated before, there was a strong push, but it was politically an enormous, let's say, effort by all. Remember the discussion at the European Council with some member states last year or 2 years ago to have indeed this objective of Europe being climate neutral or carbon neutral by 2050. So I think Europe has really opened the way, shown strong leadership. And indeed, it is now, as you may remember, at the heart of the European political agenda, as defined by these, new European Commission back 2 years ago with the European Green Deal, which is really the cornerstone of everything and mainstream in all policies of everything the Commission will do in this current mandate. So I really believe that the EU has done a lot. Is it enough? We'll see. But I think, as shown also in the national debate in Ireland, France, and elsewhere, it's already a huge challenge. Look at Ireland. We're talking about close to 7% annual reduction in greenhouse gases, which is day by day and year by year a huge step to climb for all of us in all sectors. Now, as I said, from a kind of outside perspective, where I had the chance to also present and defend the European agenda abroad in a country like Indonesia, the fourth largest populated country in the world, 8th by GDP in real terms, and probably the sixth emitter of greenhouse gases, mainly through land use, mainly through, sadly, deforestation. It was frankly the EU which was driving this. It was not the US, it was not China, Japan, Australia. We were the only one really encouraging, pushing, financing also largely the efforts of such a large country, booming, emerging, to, let's say, engage in its climate transition. And so I strongly believe, maybe have invested here, but I strongly believe that the EU is doing its job. We are also leading in terms of economic transition in Europe. I think the good thing also in the European Union approach is that, as Stéphane was said, we are also enhancing our objective. Remember, we had said initially, as I said, by 2030, we wanted to have 40% greenhouse gas reduction. Now, yesterday, the European Parliament has accepted the proposal by the European Commission and the Council to have a 55% reduction compared to 1990 levels. So we are enhancing our efforts. And so all in all, I think we're doing a good job. Now, of course, everything is on the implementation. And coming back to the Irish climate debate, the laws set the scene, and now it will be for each and every department to implement this and to find the necessary incentives or penalties for various industries to deliver. But I think we are on at least we have the frame, and this has been at a huge. It has been a huge political effort. So I believe we're in a good place for COP26. Hopefully, Stéphane will confirm. But there's a huge now work to follow in terms of delivery. Certainly, thank you, Mark. I'm afraid you're.
Vincent, sorry. Before I go back to Stéphane, I just wanted Before I go back to Stéphane, you mentioned an external view as well as an internal view of the EU. How does the world see the EU in this regard? I mean, you've given a sterling articulation and defense of the EU's track record, its leadership, the numbers, etc. How does the world see Europe?
Well, if I may, we are seen, and also sharing this, of course, I don't pretend to be the only, let's say, EU representative here, but we're seen both ways. We're certainly seen as the one who polluted first, who through the Industrial Revolution, the 18th, 19th century, have been the one, let's say, spoiling the planet, certainly. And so we are seen by many as having a core responsibility, both for the past, but now also for the future in terms of financing the efforts of the developing countries, that's for sure. But we're also seen probably more positively as the one now getting, sharing inspiration. And I said it probably as a European, compared again to the US, compared to Japan, compared to other rich countries, we are showing the way. And I think we should be very proud of this. Yes, all kinds of issues around finances, all kinds of issues around access to technology. We may come back to this later, where I think we're doing a lot, and close to, I think, 20% of our development aid is also earmarked for climate action in developing countries. So there is a sense of responsibility, but I think we're up to the challenge. And I think we, again, compared to other actors, we can be very proud of what we do.
Back to you, Stéphane. Against a rather bleak performance history in terms of the previous COPs and the numbers you presented in respect of target reduction in emissions versus what actually happened, it's hard not to be, I suppose, cynical or pessimistic about the outlook. What do you think might change the psychology of leaders coming into COP26? The first part of my question. And the second would be, in your view, what might success look like in simple terms that one could articulate to the ordinary person in the street? Please, Stéphane.
Well, it's a tough one. I might start with the second one. What might success look like? I think it depends what standpoint you are from. If you're a developed country or developing country, first of all, because success from a developing country would mean that there is commitment on the part of developed countries to help them not only mitigate, but also adapt. And that's the second tier. You know, in the Paris Accord, they're really the two great pillars are mitigation and adaptation. And adaptation is also absolutely crucial, because it's to adapt to the consequences of climate change, which is just as important as mitigation for many countries. And it's so important, the fact that the UN Secretary General has kept saying in the last months that we must rebalance climate finance so that half of the climate finance that is allocated to developing countries goes to adaptation. So there's this sense of solidarity and shared responsibility really must be addressed, and so that's one of the key factors of the success of COP26. And the other issue, and that's going back to what I said originally, is to show the world that at the end of COP26 we are back on track to meeting the objective of the Paris Agreement. And just to remind you of the objective of the Paris Agreement is to be able to remain in a window between 1.5 and 2 degrees. We have to stay well below 2 degrees rise in temperature, with the aim of being as close as possible to 1.5. We're already at 1.2, so we have, you know, just a little wiggle of room to maneuver, and we'll be in that window very, very soon. And we mustn't go outside of that window. And the measure of success will be when the scientists crunch the numbers and see according to what everybody has provided with, well, are we going to be meeting that target? Now, in terms of leadership and where have things changed? I think things have changed in the fact that if you go back 10 years ago, and even at the time of COP21, there was this idea that fighting against climate change would be at the expense of a developing economy. And it's something that, first of all, we, the European Union, have showed that it's possible to go against that premise, because we, as Vincent reminded us, we fulfilled our target of going down 20% from 1990 to 2020. But at the same time, our economy, EU-wide, has grown about 60%. So we have shown that it is possible to develop while reducing emissions. And we're, I think, a magnificent case in point for the rest of the world to see that it is possible. And there's also the sense that doing nothing will cost much more than doing something. It was something that the Stern report showed back in the 2000s, but now it's really, the penny is finally dropping with everybody. And there's also the sense that not only is it going to cost less to do something than to do nothing, but it also a new land of opportunities really is developing. And it's interesting to see the new language that the Biden administration is using. You know, they keep talking about jobs, good paying union jobs that will come with the transition that we're going to have, a transition that will be beneficial to the economy, that will be beneficial to the air we're breathing. And it's a whole societal change that people are realizing is really worthwhile.
Very good, Stéphane. Vincent, the role of finance in all of this, it is fascinating that the COVID crisis seems to have changed the whole lens that the economists use. They don't use the dreaded austerity word anymore, and money seems to be in plentiful supply. And even before COVID, I think, many of us, who had experience of development felt there was more money than there were projects a lot of the time, as capital was looking for somewhere to go. Talk to me about the role of finance and as a critical enabler in helping us achieve the objectives and the targets of 1.5 degrees climate warming.
Well, indeed, it's very interesting question, because there are, I think, a legitimate expectation by many, let's say, least developing countries, maybe less so in my view by emerging or middle income countries, to have access to, let's say, subsidized funding to adapt to a green economy. And certainly there is a responsibility of, let's say, the global north to help in our own interest. At the same time, it is indeed quite a complicated issue. I give you just one example, again, back from my experience in Indonesia, where interestingly, Indonesia, being on the so-called Ring of Fire with volcanoes and etc., is also has the largest potential in the world for how do you call it in English, geothermic, Earth-generated heat and electricity. A huge potential, much more by any comparison than any country. And there's technology which could provide electricity for something close to 15, 16 or so cent per kilowatt or kilowatt, anyhow, 60 cent, where the kind of dirty coal cost half, 8 cents. And then there was this issue of, is it worth for such an emerging country where the electricity consumption is almost doubling every 5-6 years to invest in this, rather in a let's say very poor quality electricity generation? And we Europeans made a very strong case to say that Yes, there was a case, because obviously, in addition to the 8-cent difference per kilowatt, you have to take into account all the so-called, externalities of very poor and dirty electricity generation, which we can see, I'm afraid to say, in China, in India, and in so many countries which have developed a huge fleet of coal-generated electricity, but with huge expenses and costs in terms of air quality and then public health. And I saw this also with my own eyes, year by year, deteriorating in Indonesia. And so it's here. It's not just about, let's say, funding a geothermal electricity plant, or it's not just about let's say funding a project or funding a study, etc. It's about really putting those countries in a kind of mindset where they have to plan for 10, 15, 20 years, whereas in their view, which is also understandable, they have a growing population, they have extremely strong growth of electricity needs, and they have a very, very, very different approach to time as we have in Europe, where we can easily plan 20, 15 years ahead because our population is more or less stable and many things are stable. They are faced with a much, let's say, more compact and much more immediate needs. Nevertheless, here too, again, I think finance is an issue, but it's not the only one. It's also about really sharing the view that you have to have. I'm not always a fan of this approach, but I mean this concept, the holistic approach. I mean an integrated approach of what climate change can bring or can cost. And it's not just about let's say the global north funding. It's about those countries integrating all the aspects, positive and negative, of both, let's say, climate inaction and climate action.
If I can jump in, I saw also there's the question about the $100 billion commitment in the chat box, which I'd like to address immediately. To say that it's nobody's forced to do anything. It's a question of well, there's the famous word CBDR, which is UNFCCC jargon, which is common but differentiated responsibilities. And again, we have our common responsibilities to deal with it, but these are differentiated responsibilities. And we collectively, developed countries, said that we owed the developing countries payback, and we owe them this money to try and deal with what has been created by us. And so it's really a question of encouraging countries to do so, and we have a lot of hope because the US have said that they would commit to the Green Climate Fund that Trump stopped. The Obama administration said they would give $3 billion, and only $1 billion was committed at the time, and so the Biden administration will come up with extra money. France committed. Our president said that we would, in the coming years, allocate 6 billion euros a year to climate finance, with 1/3 devoted to adaptation. And so we need to tell others. We need to tell Australia, who are woefully insufficient in their climate finance. We need to tell South Korea, which is now an OECD country, and so on. And so there's this sort of common healthy competition, which we hope will drive the ambition. But we shouldn't concentrate solely on the 100 billion, because 100 billion, in fact, is really woefully insufficient to deal with the problem. Just to give you an example, I'm just back from India, and India has committed 450 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2030. 460 gigawatts. It's just to give you a comparison, we have our nuclear, whole nuclear capacity is 60, in France is 60. gigawatts. So 450, you can imagine how much that can represent. And in order to achieve that, they need $100 billion themselves per year to achieve that target. So what we really need to do is to tap into the private sector, and it's something that Special Envoy John Kerry has kept saying since he took office. We need to tap into the trillions of dollars of private money that's lying around, of investors who would be keen to allocate some of those this money to green growth, and with perhaps risk guarantees that are needed. And it's something that we developed as what's called a solar mitigation risk initiative as part of the International Solar Alliance, which precisely is designed to encourage private finance into these risky endeavors in developing countries to develop solar in particular, and which can channel all this private funding that is absolutely necessary for transition.
Very good. So I'm going to put two questions to both of you, one of which came in the chat. The first is a bugbear of mine, and will COP26 deal with it? The issue of what I call carbon getting a free ride and we're not paying the economic or the environmental cost of carbon in the purchase of goods and services and aircraft, etc., okay, and flight tickets, etc. So I'm really interested to know what's happening in terms of pricing carbon properly so that normal rational economics can work and investment has the right signals, etc. And then the second one is, can we do this without nuclear? It came in there in the chat. Can we do a zero carbon world without nuclear? Vincent, you're up first.
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in carbon pricing, and as Stéphane said, it's a pretty complicated issue. I would prefer, if you don't mind, also a French ambassador here to answer the second question, where I'm not an expert either, but as a Frenchman and someone also interested certainly in energy and climate action, I would tend to say, from what I know and read, etc., that at least from a French perspective, any reasonable, objective assessment of our need in terms of decarbon economy, in terms of carbon neutral economy, in terms of shift to alternative source of power generation, cannot work without nuclear energy, just because the amount of electricity in particular required vastly outnumber what renewable energy can produce in most countries. Maybe not in certain countries blessed with particular renewable energy generation. Ireland maybe was wind, or Denmark also was wind, or Iceland with geothermal, etc. Probably. But frankly speaking, we're talking about rather, without insulting anyone, smaller economies. If you talk about India, if you talk about China, if you talk the European Union as a whole, I'm afraid to say, and to say loudly and on record, that you cannot achieve this without nuclear energy. And by the way, there's a whole debate now raging at the European level whether or not to label nuclear energy as carbon neutral and it's environmental friendly or not. Of course, from a French perspective, we would say and bang on the table and say, yes, it is. And if you dare say it's not, you are just following something which is ideological, but which has nothing to do with, let's say, scientific reality. And so I know the prevention in Ireland and many European countries and non-European countries against nuclear energy. At the same time, also go to the record and you would see that the number of incidents, at least in Europe, on nuclear energy generation is very small, not to say almost inexistent. And that at the end of the day, if you look also at France and France's record over the last 60 years or 50 years, where we had close to 70–80% of our nuclear energy generated by nuclear, our carbon production has been what is it, 5 times lower or 4 times lower than Germany, for example. And so I think that recent history, the last 50 years or so, has shown that nuclear energy has a very, very good record. Yes, there was Fukushima. Yes, there were other incidents. Not talking about the incident behind the former Soviet bloc, because probably standards were not the same as our standards. But all in all, it remains in front of the challenge we're facing, the best option. Of course, with renewable energy as much as possible. But renewable energy, let's be frank, cannot compensate for the lack of any lack of nuclear energy. But I'm glad to leave also Stéphane was very more knowledgeable.
The ambassador's looking the question anyway, that's for sure.
Yeah.
You've certainly answered that very emphatically. Your thoughts, Stéphane, on the 2 questions, the price of carbon and the role of nuclear in the total solution, please.
Yeah, well, on nuclear, I mean, I'm completely in agreement with Vincent. You would not be surprised. Nuclear really should be seen as part of the solution. It's not the solution, of course, but it's an important part of it. And we have set a trajectory for nuclear energy, where we're phasing out a little bit of it. It's currently at 70% of electricity production is from nuclear energy. And in a law that was passed in 2019, we decided to reduce that to 50% by 2035. So we're on track to diminishing the amount of nuclear energy as part of the energy mix. But that doesn't mean that we're getting rid of it. It's there to stay in France, and it's a very important factor in our good standing in terms of greenhouse gas emissions per capita, which, as Vincent said, is really, I think it's the lowest per capita in the European Union. In terms of carbon pricing, it's a hugely important topic. It's something that economists have been advocating for a long, long time, and it's something that we Europeans have put in place. In fact, 15 years ago, with our ETS, European Trading System, that covers about 11,000 big plants, very energy-consuming plants in Europe, and whereby they're given a set target of tons of emissions they're allowed to use, and if they go over that target, they have to buy it on the market. And it was rather difficult to get off the ground, that ETS system, as it's called, because I remember at the time when I was, at the time of Paris Agreement, when I was in the Ministry of Environment, I was looking at the price of carbon very closely, and it was hovering at around €5 a ton. So not much of an incentive for a company to change its way of producing electricity or of using electricity, because they could just buy the extra tons they needed on the market. Now we're at €45 a ton, which because the system is such that every year there are some quotas that are being taken off the market, and so it's becoming more and more difficult for companies to buy them on the market. And that's the whole idea, is to drive up the price of carbon so that these companies are incentivized to change the way they're going to be using their energy. And they're going to invest in such a way that they will be using a renewable energy and certainly not emit as much as they used to. So it is a system that works. And it's a system that we'll keep driving because it's very efficient. And here comes in the crux and another problem, which is it's all very well to do it here, but what happens if other countries don't do it? Hence the idea of what we call CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which will be, and that was really a French initiative for years and years. We've been advocating for it, and the Commission at the time was saying, no, too complicated, let's concentrate on what's already there, and particularly the ETS program, which I described. And then finally, with the new commission, with Ursula von der Leyen coming in, they thought, that's a good idea. Let's try and have a carbon border adjustment mechanism that will prevent what's called carbon leakage, i.e. if we have set high standards for producing steel, let's say, and all the companies go abroad because they have lesser standards abroad, and then they import back the steel, everybody loses out. The planet loses out, our economy loses out. And so the idea is to introduce a mechanism whereby we would price the incoming steel at the price that is set at European Union level. And so we're waiting for the proposal of the Commission, that'll because the devil is in the detail, as you can imagine, which will be presented in June. And then under French presidency of the European Union will be working very much with other partners to try and introduce that. I would just like to add that it's something that's not looked at very favorably by our partners. China, India, Russia, South Africa, even the United States are sort of looking at it a little bit with wariness, but the first ones I mentioned have expressed much opposition to it already, even before it was introduced. But it's something that we're very intent to do, and it's a high priority of our president for the French presidency of the EU.
And to finish on carbon pricing, just what are your thoughts on sectors that have exemptions at the moment from any form of such tax, like aviation? Are we going to get to the point where no sector gets a free pass on this? What are your thoughts on that? Where is the conversation in Europe and at a global level on that? Maybe Vincent to start, and then Stéphane.
Okay, Stéphane, please jump in, of course. But my understanding is no, that there should be no free ride for anybody, and certainly no sector should be exempt of contributing. It's true for agriculture, where the challenges are huge in France, in Ireland, elsewhere. It's true for, let's say, heavy industry, as mentioned by Stéphane, and it's certainly also huge, true for aviation and let's say sea transport. As I remember, but Stéphane will know better. There were also a French and a European initiative for sea transport, which is highly polluting, maybe less per tons, because we're talking about bulk transport, but nevertheless with very, very poor quality fuel, so it's highly polluting. And here too, there are initiatives to let this sector contribute, and certainly aviation. Here too, a booming sector, which initially had a very small contribution because it was rather marginal compared to others, but in respect of its very strong growth, and if you boil down to per capita, it's horrendous. And so they have to contribute, and also, as Stéphane said, precisely to also drive innovation, to push them to jump to alternative source of technology, so whatever, solar, hydrogen, to push them, and that there is that they just not continue to say, well, we exempt because we are so special. No, that cannot be the case anymore, where pressure is so high. But sorry, Stéphane.
Stéphane, a quick comment on that, and then I'm going to take a question off the chat.
Absolutely, it's. I mean, every sector should be concerned, and one of the proposals that are being it's not yet, as I said, the presentation of the Commission has not been put forward yet, but one of the ideas is to include aviation in the ETS sector, in the renewed ETS. So we're getting there.
Kieran from the audience has asked, given that we're so close to 1.5 degrees already, do you agree with the UN 2019 production gap report that says the vast majority of fossil fuel reserves will have to be written off? Stéphane?
No, totally. I mean, the IPCC has said it for years. It said back in 2015, and it's more true than ever, that in order to meet that target, 2/3 of what has been discovered in terms of fossil fuels needs to remain in the ground. So when we see fossil fuel companies exploring, doing more exploration and of gas and oil, it goes completely counter what science is telling us.
Vincent, I trust you agree with that.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I think if you look at some, if not all of the major oil companies, they're all trying desperately to diversify, because they know also that for their own stocks and for their own stockholders, they need to diversify in order to have a long-term perspective for the companies.
Anya has asked here, and my words, not hers, because it's quite a long piece. Are we over fixated on carbon at the expense of the broader environment and biodiversity? Now, I think people understand the fixation with carbon as being the primary damaging impact, but are we leaving enough space in the conversation for the environment and biodiversity? Stéphane?
The short answer is yes, absolutely. We are very much looking at biodiversity as well. You know that the summit, the Rio summit back in 1992, from that summit emerged 3 big conventions. That's the one we just been talking about, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. But there's also 2 other conventions, one on biological diversity and the last one on desertification. And these really are different aspects of the same issue. And we are extremely aware, and we advocate for the fact that there are these connections between biodiversity and climate. Hence, one of the targets of our development agency, the Agence Française de Développement, that has decided to have 30% of its climate action with co-benefits to biodiversity. I'll just give you one example. When we restore coastlines in developing countries, and we do development aid for restoring wetlands, for restoring mangroves, it restores biodiversity. It acts against, it deals with adaptation to the effects of climate change, because these wetlands and these mangroves can absorb up to 95% of the energy of an oncoming storm and waves coming into the land. And so these co-benefits are immediate. You see it both works for climate and it works for biodiversity, and it's something that is more and more in the minds of developed countries, and it's what we call nature-based solutions that are there to address both issues. And also, one more thing I can mention is the Green Wall, the new project. It's in fact an old project, but it's been renewed with the One Planet Summit that took place in January. It's the idea of having a sort of wall of forest and agroecology and so on in the Sahel region, in the 11 countries of the Sahel. 16 billion euros are being allocated to that project from bilateral donors, international donors, World Bank, etc. And that's precisely something that addresses both biodiversity, loss of fighting against desertification, climate change, but also security, employment. So it's a very, very holistic approach.
That's on. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, very shortly. I mean, I completely agree, of course, with what Stéphane said, which is very informative. But just also to remind that there are 2 carbon sinks, you know, the ocean and forests or land use. And I think France and EU are actively promoting everything which keeps the kind of role of these carbon sinks. Certainly on the ocean, there are many initiatives to research, etc., on the oceans, avoid also plastic pollution on the oceans. And secondly, on the forest, we are actively also promoting the fight against deforestation through illegal logging, etc. I mean, in Indonesia, it was a core almost of my task there, because of the importance of the primary or wet forest in Indonesia, as in the Congo basin and in the Amazonas basin. And so these are also, of course, action to support biodiversity where it's the richest.
Very good. Gentlemen, the clock is against us. I could talk to you guys all day, frankly. It's just such a pleasure and it's so informing. I'm going to give you 90 seconds each and I'm going to give you a really big challenge. Tell us why at the end of this year, the world will be in a better place, maybe than it is now, through the efforts of COP26. Why should we be hopeful? Stéphane.
Oh, gosh. Well, we should be hopeful because there's a growing realization that we have no time to spare. And all the, you mentioned the UNEP gap report, we have the IPCC reports. I mean, the science is absolutely clear. We cannot afford not to win that battle and that war, because otherwise the consequences will be really terrible. And again, there is that growing realization, and also the technology is with us. I mean, because at the end of the day, a lot of it is a matter of finance and how much will things cost. And when you see that solar energy now is in fact less expensive than coal when it's not subsidized, there is room for hope.
That's all.
Thank you. And for me, Mark, I think, yes, I'm certainly very hopeful for three reasons. First, I think there's a growing awareness among population worldwide, not just in Europe. Secondly, there is a citizen support for climate action and transition. And thirdly, I think there is a growing, even though slowly, but international cooperation. We are not only the only one. I mean, there is more and more support internationally, and that's also very positive.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for a wonderful hour of conversation, and to finish on that hopeful tone. I think it's a defining year. I think I said earlier, both in COVID and in terms of climate, and I hope I get the opportunity to talk to you both again. And best wishes, and thank you to the audience who signed in this morning. Mary, do you want to finish up with anything, or?
Yes, I'd just like to echo your comments there. I feel we're finishing on a high. I was interested to hear that nuclear seems to be part of the solution. Very, very interesting discussion. Thank you to Mark, to Stéphane, to Vincent. Thank you, everybody, for contributing your questions. It's very clear we could be here for a lot longer. So I look forward to having another event under the umbrella of our working group. As I said, I'd like to thank the speakers. I'd also like to thank Leona McGowan and Leah Bagley at the Chamber, and also the team at the French Embassy in Dublin for helping us to support this and organise this event this morning. So thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
God bless.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Mark. À bientôt, Vincent.
Bye bye. Merci, Stéphane. À bientôt.